Today, I want to welcome Campbell. He is a content creator, speaker, and researcher. He runs the Autodidactic YouTube channel covering topics including frequency, free energy, health, history, theosophy, and asking better questions. Campbell, welcome. How you doing?
Good, good. How you going? Thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much for coming on. It's great to have you. You've done some great work presenting compelling evidence of an alternative history that opens up many fascinating possibilities. Intentionally destroyed advanced civilizations, parasitic dark occultists that manipulate reality. And this work is bringing possible answers to questions that seem to be unanswerable so far. So, I really enjoy sharing these possibilities with the audience. There's a lot to get to with this work. Before we do, this is your first time on the show. Tell us just a little bit about yourself and let the audience know how they can find out more.
Sure, yep. I run a couple of YouTube channels, so autodidactic, like it's behind me, which means to be self-educated. So that's kind of the theme behind the channel is just to put out, to get people to ask better questions. Really, is what it is. I don't really want to tell anyone anything. I think we all just need better questions. So I've been going down the alternative history route for like decades since the 90s. I sort of started with Graham Hancock and all that kind of stuff and got through about 2014 or so. I found Tartaria and mudfloods and star forts and yeah, that kind of altered my research and I've been going down that path ever since, really. And everything that's tied to it, obviously, the whole ruling system, what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
how do we get out of here?
Yeah. This is a topic that I'm sure much of my audience is familiar with, but for those that aren't, and if you're new to the subject of Tartaria, where would you start in trying to give people a basic synopsis of what this topic is? How far back would we go in our history?
Well, that's an interesting one. We research resets, cyclical resets. So it looks like that the Earth, gets reset basically every so often. And it looks like there was a reset, at least a repopulation in the mid 1800s, a reset probably in the late 1700s. And we see the evidence all around us of these amazing buildings, the architecture, the cathedrals, and all these old world big stone buildings that are supposed to have been built, in the Dark Ages, back around 1,000 years ago or more, by horse and cart, hammer and chisel, no heavy machinery, obviously no electrics or steam or anything like that. Um, when you look into these buildings, it's always the same story. They just don't know who really built it. I don't know, there's just no information on them. You can't find blueprints, of the buildings, the architectural plans or anything. And then when you get to places like Australia, because we're obviously the story is only 200 years old, right? Captain Cook turned up in 1788, so we've got a much shorter timeline than most people. And so all of ours were built by convicts and just,
Yeah.
designed by people who weren't architects. And then they went on to design, they won a competition. They always win an architectural competition. Then they go on to design, like 20 buildings in 10 years, and they're the best buildings, in the country. So you find these very, very funny stories when you start actually looking into history and trying to make it make sense. It just does not make sense at all. It's just full of holes. That's why I call it his story, because that's all it's just a story. It's not our
Hmm.
story though.
Maybe we could get an idea of what a pre reset civilization may have looked like. You said that there was multiple possible resets 1700s, 1800s. What would our pre reset civilization look like as far as technology, how advanced we were, things of that nature?
Yeah, well, I think it was definitely more creative. There's a lot of art paintings from the 1700s, which show their clothes and their carriages and all these things, and they're all so ornate and so creative. And then you look at the building. So I think they were living in a society where they understood about the ether and energy, and
Mm.
that basically there is free energy. All you need to do is know how to tap into it. So they weren't industrialized. They weren't running on an economy that was around money. They seem to have been building a society that was based around making the optimum, space for humans, right? For men and women. So these big cathedrals we see everywhere are they're healing machines. They're big energy healing machines. And so they pull in ether and then they harmonize it to certain frequencies through the bells, the choirs, all this kind of stuff. And they were places to go for people to go and heal. And I guess, that energy that heals you, I guess people felt close to God, right? Maybe that's why they switched them to religions, right? Because it would have been full of all this energy in there. And we see these symbols and these shapes, the domes, all this stuff just all across the world. And like I said, I'm in Australia and, our buildings are exactly the same as ones we find in the US, in Europe, in South America. And that doesn't make sense.
Mm.
Every time you read it, it's just, a revival. They were doing it in a revival style and all this, so we've got all these, Gothic architecture and Greco-Romano and all this kind of stuff. But when I look at it, I just see different machines. I think they're different components, different machines that do different jobs. And, I doubt that we were actually ever supposed to live or inhabit these places. I think, you would go there to get healed or whatever. I think some were just, not even meant for habitation, right? They were just energy generators or different types of machinery. And now we've just turned them all into housing and shops and, warehouses. And basically that they've all been turned off. So
Mm.
yeah, it looks like there was some kind of invading force at some kind, which I think is becoming clear to everyone, right? That there's some force that's in control at the moment that's not human.
Well, before we get to that, you
Yeah,
would
yeah,
say that this was a somewhat harmonious global civilization, like you
yeah.
said, had advanced knowledge of energy and energy healing. Would you say that this is also what some believe to be the millennial reign of Christ?
Um, I mean, yeah, I would use different wording, but I think it's the same idea at
Okay.
least. As far as, I mean, I guess when you're talking about the millennial reign, they talk a lot more about saints, and it's got more of a religious Christian sort of connotation to it. But I mean, the concept of, a free society where it was everyone was living, harmoniously in harmony. Again, one of those frequency words that are all throughout our language, by the way. Like harmony, right? We like to live in harmony.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think the free energy, good food, and that they weren't dealing with stuff like their food being poisoned, their water being poisoned, their air being poisoned, right? It was completely opposite to what we've got. It was all built to enhance the experience, right? For
Mm.
everyone. And so yeah, I think we were looking at a harmonious worldwide, not necessarily one, I think we just had different cultures, but they were interacting, sharing information, technology, and living harmoniously for sure. And I'm sure that they were much higher vibing, I guess you could say, to what we are. So in that sense, they would have, been more saintly, that kind of thing. But so yeah, I think it's, I'm not a Christian myself, but I understand the concept.
Right,
And
right.
obviously after that, then we get Satan's little season, and which very now, and look around. So that kind of makes sense, right?
Right. Well, let's talk about the parasitic invaders. You alluded that there's a lot of anti human ideologies that have come out of this reset, and I'd have to agree 1,000%. The question is, where does that come from? Is it from a human ruling class of bloodlines that are psychotic because they have been multi generationally inbred to be psychopaths, or is there some other outside force that is influencing these global rulers in some way. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm definitely on the it's an outside force side of the
Mm,
fence. I guess the way I see it, as far as resets and things, is to me it's like a sine wave, which I get. It's like the precession of the equinox, how they have the golden age, the bronze age, and then it sort of goes back up. So I think we go from low energy to high energy to lower, like a sine wave. We go up and down, and that's the
mm,
resets. So we just happen to be in one of the low rate realms, right, where some dark force has taken over. So where it came from, I obviously that I don't know, but I would say it's some kind of intelligence consciousness that's come in, probably interdimensional, or it's got in somehow, right?
mm-hmm.
And then it's like you said, it's a parasite. So it has then got its first host, its first human host, and influence that person, and then over the years and hundreds of years, it's just basically possessed, right? So it's the same again idea as demons and devils and all this kind of stuff, possessions.
Right.
And of course, this is the society that they've created around us, right? The
Mm-hmm.
consumer society, where they want us to be constantly going out and buying possessions. It's kind of all in the wording, right? It's all spelling. So yeah, I think they've infected a bloodline, and that's why we hear so much about bloodline families. They want to keep that pure, or at least the ruling consciousness does, because it wants to have total control, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's instilling its grip on these families, and they're basically the henchmen, the front men. They're the people we see, the people who are really in control, or the whoever they are beings. You know, we're never going to see them. They're all hidden away somewhere. So all
Right.
we see is the front men, and the stars and all this kind of stuff. The people who want our worship, much like many gods want your worship. So it's very, it definitely runs, parallel lines with, concepts like the devil, the great deceiver, and a lot of the stuff from the Bible, described, they'll be arrogant, things like this. And this is what we see with
Mm-hmm.
these people who wish to rule us, or, these entities.
Many people look at this information and wonder how it's possible to reset an entire planet or an entire civilization. How would they go about doing this? And you've presented evidence of a global mud flood possibility. There's very compelling evidence within a lot of places around the planet. If you look at the buildings that have been submerged, as well as other geological factors, but talk a little bit about how an entire civilization can be reset.
Well, we've all heard of MK Ultra,
Mm,
I'm guessing. Basically, mind control through fear and things like this. So basically, that's what war is, right? We all know about the World War One and World War Two, and that's basically a massive MK Ultra event, right? It just
mm,
fractures people's
yeah.
psyches and consciousness through trauma. And so I think this is what happened, especially when you've got a civilization that's peaceful, right? They don't really, I don't believe they had armies and all this. They weren't fighting with each other like we do. And so basically, yeah, you go in and attack them and create catastrophes to create MK Ultra. So you fracture. So basically, the people that are left are much more controllable. And it really only takes one generation to change the script, right? Because as long as you separate the children from the parents when they're very young, then you can reprogram them whichever way you want. And what we see is around the 1850s, we have this phenomena of orphans. There's orphans everywhere. All this talk of orphans, it's all the books like, Tom Sawyer,
Yeah.
Huckleberry Finn, Oliver Twist,
Mm,
Little Orphan Annie. There's all these books from the 1800s, all about orphans. And then with a bit of digging, you'll find the orphan trains
yeah.
where it's documented. They were sending kids all over the place, internationally,
So
throughout
weird.
countries, just all these kids, right? And somehow, no one knows who the parents were, or the parents, didn't seem to care. These trainloads of kids were being shipped off to people. So it looks a lot like a repopulation.
Mm.
And then we have these things called World's Fairs, which basically were these massive constructions, and we're told that they were built, we're talking like constructions over, like tens and tens of acres, with some buildings being over an acre under the roof,
Hmm.
right? And the story is they were all just built temporarily
Yeah.
to hold a fair, and then they knocked them all over, right? So you have these massive, when you see these cities, that they're not, they tell us they're built of like, stucco and drywall and all this kind of stuff. But then there's fountains everywhere. There's canals everywhere. There's clearly has to be plumbing. They never talk about this stuff. So they look like the old world cities. And what they're doing is erasing them, erasing the memory of them. But in these World's Fairs, we have again this curious thing pops up of infant incubators, where they were. There's even signs, photos of signs that say they were growing an infant, a 12 months old infant in like 6 weeks, I think it
Yeah.
was. So they were talking about advanced growing.
Yeah.
You could take one home, like literally, you could walk into these and take a baby home, right? So it's very, very weird, right? There's all these
Yeah.
they're creating babies and and then jump forward to today, and we're seeing this again, right? That they've literally got these crib things that they can grow a baby in to full term. That they're even talking about robots, believe it or not, that have like a see-through stomach, and you can watch your baby gestate inside a robot. So
That's wild.
and of course, you tie this to all the other stuff, like Mr. Gates and his parents and what they're involved with. I'll be careful with my language, but the whole Bill Gates' parents started Planned Parenthood, which and with he likes well, he's on tape saying that he would like less people
Mm.
on the earth. Let's just say it that way, right? So
While
so
we're
there's this big line, yeah.
while we're talking about some of the evidence, you mentioned the World's Fairs, orphan strains. There's also these massive fires that were being set
Yes,
across the
yes.
entire planet that conveniently would destroy a lot of this evidence for advanced
Mm.
civilizations.
Yeah, yeah. Just type Great Fire into
Mm.
Google, and you'll see this massive list, basically from the 1860s to 1900, early 1900s. Most major cities across Europe, Australia, and the US were burnt, right? Just burnt to the ground, and it was always some silly story like some cow kicked over a candle, and the whole
Yeah.
city burnt. And then you look at these cities and they're not wooden. They kind of give us this impression, when they teach us history, that it was all wood and all this kind of. But you look at it, we're talking brick buildings, stone buildings,
Hmm.
stuff that doesn't burn, at least not easily. So they're burning. I mean, if you burn a brick house, the house is going to stay there, but everything inside is probably going to burn, right? So it was another way I think they were getting rid of technologies, right? That they had back then that they didn't want us to know. And of course, they would have kept all the tech, and this is what they're doing. Like we have, Elon Musk with Tesla electric cars, but we had electric cars back in 1900, and they were running off lead acid batteries and going further than a Tesla goes today.
Hmm.
They were doing hundreds of miles. So what they do is they keep all this technology, they put it in the inventory, right? And then when they want to bring it out, when they've worked out how they can control it and sell it to us, then you need an inventor who goes to the inventory, grabs some tech and brings it out and goes, "Here you go, I invented this." So, sorry, a bit of a sidetrack there.
No, it's all
But yeah,
good.
but the great fires, we had them all throughout Australia as well, and we had the World Fairs, and in Sydney in 1900, the big World's Fair building burnt down. It was glass and brick, but it burnt down somehow. And in that building was all the records of Australia up to that date. So
Hmm.
they all got burnt. So it's modern. It's book burning, right?
Yeah.
We hear of book burning going way back. It's just the same thing,
Well,
and
this
they're
is
just
something else
storing
that's
information.
difficult for people. The possibility that our entire history was rewritten, that science was reimagined, that everything that we understand as far as academia has presented has been manufactured in some way, and that's difficult for people to wrap their heads around. But from what I understand, there were people sanctioned to do this very thing.
Yeah, like the Rockefellers.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically they, with medicine as well. Again, I'll be careful with what I say, but basically they took over the medical industry. They outlawed, like herbalists and natural sort of healers, and push their basically petroleum-based medicine, right, which was basically the waste of because the Rockefellers owned Standard Oil, right? So they had all this waste. They're like, how can we use it? I know.
Yeah.
Let's give it to people and tell them it'll cure them. And through that, they then took over the universities. So they controlled who could be a doctor, like literally. So then that's how they completely wiped out the other side. And then through that, they took over the education system, and they basically run it. They run the curriculums. They say what's going to be taught. And as we know, school we don't get taught what we need to get taught. We get taught, the maths they teach us is basically just enough that you can pay your tax, right? All the information is really just to get you ready to sit in a cubicle and work for 40 years. And this is what they say. If you read their doc, they tell you. They say straight out. Rockefeller, God, I think it was John D, said, "I want a nation of workers, not a nation of thinkers."
Hmm.
And he's the guy who's running the education system. So, and this, like I said, it's all documented. It's all out there to read. That they tell us all this stuff, but they obviously don't promote it. You've got to go and look for this stuff. But yeah, and just another interesting fact is that all the textbooks in the US at least and Europe were printed by Ghislaine Maxwell's father owned it since 1899. Sorry, 1989. He's owned the company that prints all the textbooks. So you got to ask yourself, what are we teaching our kids, and who are these people that we're trusting this information with? I mean,
Yeah.
it's not really, you wouldn't let your kids hang out with these people, so why let them educate them?
Right.
You know,
I recently had Guy Anderson on. I'm pretty sure
nice.
you're familiar
Talking to
with
guys.
him as
Yeah, I'm
well.
talking to him tonight, actually.
Oh,
Yeah,
wonderful, wonderful. He's
yeah,
of the
yeah.
belief that associated with the orphan train phenomena, there may have been human cloning, and the
Mm.
ability to clone humans may have been around for a very long time. Do you share that belief?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a definite possibility. I've definitely looked into it.
Mm.
The whole Cabbage Patch phenomena, obviously, most people probably know about Cabbage Patch Kids from the 80s, but there was all these very strange postcards that were found from the 1800s, and they had all these kids in cabbage patches. It's very strange. And then there was a couple of movies made about it. So it's basically, we're not saying that we think babies grew out of cabbages, but it's basically a way of getting their truth across, right? And also, I think, it's kind of tongue in cheek. They can talk to each other. This is what they do, right? But the public are not wise to what's going on. So, like, yeah, like I said, they're rebuilding the technology now, and I mean, just look around at a lot of the videos. So many people are questioning the whole cloning thing at the moment, like all these celebrities and stars who seem to sort of change the way they look suddenly, like
Yeah.
or unalived, and people, it's in very strange circumstances, and it's like, well, are they really gone, or did they just change the role? But I think, yeah, even it might sound like a crazy concept, but I think if you just look around at the world today and what's going on, it's not so crazy because the thing is that they're far, far, far advanced in technology than we are, right? They only release to us what they want us to have. So, as far as, even history being rewritten, you've even got to ask how old is AI, right?
Mm.
Sure, they've just introduced it to us, but that doesn't mean they haven't had it. And when you read a lot of the history, especially the Wikipedia history, which is, a bit dodgy, it sounds like it's written by AI. It's always the same story. It repeats itself, and it doesn't flow. It's just there's too many coincidences, too many of the same story for it to be real, in my opinion. But so yeah, as far as the cloning, I think, like I said, they had baby what are they called? At the World's Fair where they were growing babies fast. They were saying,
Yeah.
you know, so yeah, it's an interesting one, and a lot of celebrities, especially rappers, for some reason, have come out and said that they are clones,
Right.
right?
I wanted to ask
It's
you
mm,
about the Civil War. It seems like that
yes.
would be a very important event to have some of this reset activity take place during.
Yes, yes. Well, America, kind of like Australia, a bit older, discovered in the late 1400s, apparently. Um, my take on it is there were people there in the Americas, in North America. Probably, I think there was a reset, so I don't think they were fully at the height that they would have been at the height of the civilization, but that they were still a civilization. They probably had a little bit of the tech left, at least were using the buildings, and I think the Civil War was just a way to wipe them out, or at least weaken them, right, so they could be controlled.
Mm,
Because my view, and it's through research, is that the whole story that's given to the black people is backwards. It's wrong. Like if you're looking at the slave trade and how many slaves they thought that they could bring over in a ship, and how many ships would have had to be done, brought over, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
right.
And so, in my view, the black population were there. That's who was in North America. And so the Civil War was not a war against North and South. It was a war against, the British and the Moors. I guess they were
Mm,
descendants of the Moors, the blacks in America. So, and this is what we see in all wars, right? Like World War Two. Obviously they blew the crap out of Germany, right? And we've got this big story around it. But when you look at the cities they attacked, like these were really, really intact old world cities, and they just flattened them. And so war is not also what we think it is, right? Obviously, all wars are bankers' wars, as Mrs. Rothschild told us. But they're also to wipe out information, right, and to change the story into their narrative. And from that they give us this story that it's us. We're the aggressive little ones. We're the
right.
warlike, people who just can't be, trusted. And but I've never met anyone who wants to start a war or be in a war. I've never even met anyone who wants to go next door to their neighbor and control them, right? But these people who run the wars do this, and they're the biggest gaslighters, right? They do stuff, and then they say, "Look what you did," just so they can bring in more rules to control us.
Well, what a hell of a way to gaslight. Not only did they rewrite history and provide the historical documentation and textbooks, but they also provided artwork and cultural behaviors surrounding the history that they wrote about. It was pretty thorough the way that they went about resetting everything, if indeed they went that route. And this is again is where people look at things like that and think it's impossible for them to have been able to do things like that. But if you look at the way they've presented our history compared to some of the new information that researchers like yourself are presenting now, it's the only way a lot of this stuff makes sense if there's been alterations made.
Yeah, yeah. We know that there was a lot of alterations, under the guise of translating, right? All these books that they get translated and translated, and then obviously they get edited as well. But yeah, I think they had tech to help them do it. I think when you sort of picture all these scribes sitting down and rewriting a whole history, then yeah, it's a bit of a stretch. But like I said, if you go and just do some research on, get some of the biggest buildings you can find in your city or your state, and just see who built them, and read the story that they give you about these architects, and you read a couple of them, and you'll start going, hang on, this is the same story over and it really is. And there's never any background, there's never any proof. They can't tell you where the materials came from or how many workmen were on it. They can't produce the plans for any of this stuff. But I think, yeah, with AI, that they've just rewritten it with AI. And then we have another concept of, which I guess ties into the millennium, the thousand missing years. What we're
Hmm.
told is the dark ages, and they say there was 1,000 years and nothing happened. It was a dark age, right,
Yeah.
nothing happened. But then we have all these, like gravestones and pictures and things that have been dated all across the world, and they have J's or I's in front of the numbers. So you'll get like I 908. And what's happened is that, those who wish to control us have come along and turned that into a one. So
Hmm.
it goes from 908 to 1908. So there's been 1,000 years added, but as far as we can tell, which gives them that stretch, right? That gap that they can kind of fill in, and they can meld it into their story of, how we've struggled, through evolution, and we've come up from the mud, and we finally hit the peak of, civilization. And but this is the thing. I mean, just look around. I mean, do we really think we're at the peak of civilization? I mean, I think that they tell us one story, but we're clearly going the opposite way, right? I mean,
Hmm.
now, like, look what's happening now with the internet. I mean, for one, people don't read books anymore. So everything on the internet is as we've seen through censorship. It's very easy to just wipe it, and it never existed.
Right.
So we're at a point now where they could quite easily wipe all the information, do all these things that they're wanting to do with natural events and wars and all this, and give it a couple of generations, and they could reset the world back to Stone Age days, right? Like literally.
Hmm.
It's that's what they're building towards. And then we have all these digital IDs coming in that they're trying to push, which is going to get us more online. Then they can track us more, and but ultimately it gives them more control over the society and which way they can lead it.
Yeah,
You
we're
know,
already starting
um,
to see a lot of that slowly unfold, changing things online, changing history books, and it can only get worse from here. I want to talk a little bit more about that soon, but I do want to go back to some of the historical evidence for resets and an advanced civilization. You talk about the star forts. How are they connected to what we're discussing here?
yes, well, Star Forts. If you haven't seen Star Forts, just Google Star Forts, go to
Hmm.
images, and you'll blow your mind. That's really my first video from on my channel is about a Star Fort, because they're just mind blowing, right? You see these massive constructions, and they're everywhere. That there's many in the US, in the northern states. They're all through the Caribbean. They're everywhere. They're through South America, Africa, Australia's got remnants of them. And we get this story that basically they were built between early 1500s, late 1700s by French and Italian builders. Basically, they say there were like these groups and they just wandered the countryside and built a star fort. But when you look at the size of these things, the story again is just pretty ridiculous. So I think the star forts are probably from a reset before what we call Tartarian buildings, which is essentially the red brick buildings and the cathedrals. But I think the star forts were, yeah, from the previous reset. And as far as we can tell, they're based on energy. They're cymatic shapes. A cymatic shape is just like a geometric shape you get when you play a frequency through certain mediums. So they mirror that, and they've got obviously lots of quartz and crystals and all this kind of stuff on them, and they're very connected to water.
Hmm.
And what we see when you look at the old maps is, I call them star cities now. Like all the cities were walled; they had a complete wall around them, and they same thing as the stars. They're called star forts because they've got all these points on them, and they look like stars. And you find these walled cities around them, and they've always got a star connected to them. So I think they were part of the infrastructure as far. I think they had a lot to do with cleaning water, structuring
Hmm.
water, probably harmonizing energy and frequency, and that they were just another part of that was utilized at least by the old world. But but yeah, the story is again like the Italians and French were building them, but then that story doesn't. That only works for Europe, right? And really, not all of it, only a small part. So then we find them in Africa, we find them in the US, in Australia, and these are clearly the exact same constructions. They're always made the same. And in the US, no, that they're all forts that were built for the Civil War, and you just got to
Right.
go, hang on. And so my first video was on Fort Jefferson, which is out in the Caribbean, a couple of hundred k's off the coast of Florida, Tortugas National Park, I think it's called.
Mm.
And that's the biggest red brick building in North America, 16 million bricks. And it's built on an atoll out in the middle of the water for the Civil War.
It's
So there's a
crazy.
couple of problems with that. Like for the Civil War, that's like that. It's an internal war, right? There's no one coming to oversee. And the second part is a fort in the sea is completely useless because boats can just sail around outside the range of your cannons, right? And 16 million bricks. How did they get them out to the middle of the ocean? The story is that it was ballast from ships that were coming over and just dumping their
Yeah.
ballast of bricks there, and they just built it on in the middle of the ocean, and then on top of it, it's got a moat, and it's literally in the ocean, but it's
Yep.
got a moat around it.
It's crazy.
So it's to me it's not a full start like a full star fort. It's been disintegrated a bit, but it's the core's there, and yeah, so it's just really silly stories, that we get. But there's some good star forts in the US. I've been to a couple. I went to one in Florida. I can't remember the name at the moment. But there's a lot. I mean, America's like Australia. It's full. It's full of these old world buildings that really have no explanation. A lot of
Hmm.
them were built by. I mean, they're not even built. They love to say they were founded,
Yeah.
right? It was founded by this person. I mean, founded is just found. They just found it. And our friends, those free masons, they just turned up and took the Freemasonry, right? All the buildings. They're like, oh, it's all free,
Hmm.
Freemasonry, right? So, yeah, this is some of the language that we hear, and I mean, even renovate, renovate. We all think, oh, renovate a house. It's actually, the word is actually renovate, which is basically to write a new contract, to make a new deal. So they went in and they renovated all the buildings, which basically they just went in and said, "There's no one here." They wrote up a little thing, I own it now," and they renovated it. So it's all this tricky stuff, but I see it as an invasion, and they've just slowly crept across. They've destroyed everything on their way, destroying the information, MK ultraing all the people, destroying the evidence of the old world, and then claiming that they built it all. Right? That's why every single government building is in an old world Tartarian building. Like the
Hmm.
White House in America looks the same as, buildings all over the world. There's heaps of them. And there's a lot in the US. Like there's a big one in Texas with a massive dome. There's one I was going through West Virginia, right? Just in the little town, there's this massive, like one of the biggest domes I've ever seen on this massive, just up in the hills, built there. It's some silly story, but you've got to ask yourself why. Why would they do this? Why would they build with domes? I mean, what's this kind of architecture got to do with the US?
Do you
Right?
think
Because the US,
what we're seeing with the Native American mounds could be something from an earlier civilization? I talked with Dr. Gregory Little before, who believes that the Native Americans may have repurposed these older constructions that may have belonged to a much older, maybe even pre Atlantean civilization.
yeah, yeah, I would agree. I think that we have ley lines, energy lines all across the world. And it's just like an energy system, like the human meridian system.
Mm-hmm.
And these ley lines intersect. They essentially make a grid, right? So where they intersect is creates like an energy vortex, right? And these are the places where they build things like star forts, like
Mm-hmm.
cathedrals and temples. And no doubt, after a reset, if the buildings are wiped out and you have Stone Age or primitive culture because they've been reset, then they still find the same power spots and they build theirs
Yeah.
on top. That's why you find all over the place, and I've been to a lot of them. You'll find churches or cathedrals, and you read into them that they're always built on the foundations of another temple or cathedral because it's the spot, it's the energy vortex that they're looking for. So yeah, I'd agree with that. Not necessarily agree with the whole Indian story because there's some information, interesting information there, but I think essentially we've all just been thrown around to different countries and we don't really know where any of us are from, right? And they're
Right.
doing it again right now. Look what they're doing with populations right now. Look at Europe. They're moving all these populations in, and there's so many countries in Europe now where the native population are now the minority.
Hmm.
So they're doing this again, right? We're living through another reset, right? Because interesting, we got onto this about 2020, the whole reset concept, and started looking into it. And then Klaus, our friend
Hmm.
Klaus came out, and what did he say? We're in a reset. This is
Right.
the great reset. Like he literally told us, and then all this weirdness started happening, right?
I wanted to ask you your thoughts about what has been unfolding. There has been a series of, it seems, stepping stone events that have led to where we are at as a society right now. I'd say you can look back as far as World War II, maybe events before that. You have JFK assassination, Vietnam, 9/11, COVID, these high impact events, and every event that is a hint of theatrics or something manufactured between, all stepping stones to where we're at as a society right now. You mentioned AI. I agree. I think that's been around a lot longer than the powers that be would let on, and they have probably been utilizing it for operations for a very long time. And that's where I think there's a fine line between planning, occult symbolism, and natural synchromysticism, which we can talk a little bit about as well. But I'd love to get your thoughts on everything that has been unfolding. You said that they're preparing for another reset. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So the way I see it is we're in, the negative side of the cycle,
Right.
and we're coming up to whatever you want to call it, the golden age, better times, high frequency. There's all these different words for it, right? And I believe that, I call them the Lites. I call them the Lites. They want to stay in control, obviously. And so this is what the way I look at it is it's engineered prophecy is what we're seeing at the moment.
What did you call them?
So
Elites?
Lites, yeah, yeah, the people of El, right? And I might have different thoughts on you to what that means, but they're the people, right? They call themselves the elites, but the
Uh huh.
Lites. So they're manufacturing prophecy. So that's why we're seeing all these events, right? And like weather events, right, everywhere. But we know it's geoengineering. It's not natural, right? They're creating this stuff and they're putting it forward as this story of end time prophecies, right? We're at the end times. Look at all this stuff. Look at all the evidence. But we know that they're creating this. This is not natural, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I believe they're bringing this in because they're trying. They know that we're going to a higher frequency, right? And basically, the way I look at it is it's all to do with charge, right? We're coming out of a negative charge and going into a positive charge. Now, when you're in a negative charge, the people in charge are the negative people, right? Because that's their charge, right? And they're like literally the people in charge, right? Making
Yeah.
making the decisions in government. And so as we go into a positive charge, that they're losing their charge, they're losing their power. So they're no longer going to be in charge because it's going to be positive. So they know this, but they're trying to keep a group of people that they can keep as their slaves, basically, right? So I think all of this is to create fear, to keep people down, low in frequency. And they believe, I don't think that they can do it, but they believe that they can, when this happens, they can keep their own little slave population, basically, because that's what they want. But the way I see it, we're going somewhere better. Things are changing for the better. You just need to look around. But they own the media, they own the music, they own the Hollywood, all this stuff. So all the propaganda we're getting, all the stuff everywhere, even on social media, is all you don't have to spend long on it. It's all end time prophecy. It's bad. Oh my God. And now aliens are invading, right? There's a mothership coming to blow us up and
Right.
all this stuff and all this the protests everywhere, right? And the civil unrest and the weather event, all this stuff. It's there to put everyone in confusion and fear, right? And mainly to get their attention. Because when they've got your attention's not on what it should be, right? Which is living your life and being your best person and giving value to the world, right? And so it really is a fight for your attention. And one thing, to do with AI and everything is, a lot of people have woken up, recently over the last 5 years, and there's a lot of information coming out, that is conspiracy theory based, shall we say. It's everywhere, right?
Hmm.
But that's also the trap.
Right. Yeah.
That's the trap because you got to understand that we know YouTube, we know who owns it. The same as TikTok, Facebook, it's all the same crew, right? And so when things get out and go viral, that's by design, right?
Hmm.
That's by design. Like you've probably noticed, a lot of people who talk about, you know, these kind of topics, we don't get pushed out, right? We don't. But then you'll find some weird thing and it gets promoted, no matter what your opinion is, you have to kind of admit the whole Charlie Kirk thing, right? That just went
Right. Well,
boom
it's just like every
everywhere.
movement that has an inkling of benefit for humanity will be infiltrated and taken over by the parasites, and then all sides are controlled, and they have the narrative on lockdown for no matter what the issue is that's being presented, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, so a lot of stuff happens that, randomly and they just take it over or they create it and they take over
Yeah.
the narrative. And then, you see it, the whole Charlie Kirk thing's a perfect example is, well, number one, like it was literally within minutes of it happening that all these theories started coming out. So
Yeah.
number
Yeah.
one,
Yeah.
they're losing power. That they're finding it very hard to keep control of the narrative.
Mm.
But also, what happened? People just started micro-analyzing every detail, right?
Yeah.
Every detail and going, and that's good. We need to know the truth, but what's the end result in that? Like what are we? Where are we getting? Like all we really need to know is everything's scripted, everything's fake. Even if it's real, they're going to change the script. They're going to try and, push us one way or the other. And I think that's the lesson. And I think we need to really see that and understand that living our lives in the 2D world, as I call it, this screen that we're in right now, it's not the best thing for us. People talk about time speeding up. We're in the quickening. Well, I would say that people aren't making memories anymore, and that's why time is speeding up because we don't have these bits, these memories in our brains, right, to give us time, to give us that view of time span, right? Like even conversations are done online, right? People aren't having this physical experience, and I think that's the quickening, right?
Mm.
Because we're fast getting into a people where there's not much is real anymore, and then you put on top of it AI, like we really, we don't know. Like over the last 5 years, how many videos
Yes.
have come out about politicians, and it's like their faces changed, or they're wearing a mask, or
Right.
oh my God, this is happening. Is it really them? We don't really know.
You're absolutely right. There's so much theatrics at play. It is difficult to tell what's real and what isn't. That seems to be by design. Even when you
Mm,
look at things like the Charlie Kirk assassination, we have theories now that that is faked, that is all staged. What we saw coming through on social media and on the TV may have even been artificial intelligence as well. The theories go from extreme on all sides, And not one person out here can tell you exactly what the truth is. Again, it seems to be by design, it seems to be where we're at. Does that mean that they are in complete control and are just gaslighting us at this point? Or are they really struggling to hold on to control and power, and that's why they have to do things like this?
Um, yeah, I definitely think they're struggling, and they're trying to hold on because a lot of this stuff they put out is clearly not grabbing, the way they want it to, and so they're in damage control. But these whatever they are, these beings, they're not creative. They don't have creativity. They're not, creators or the creation, right? So they can run scripts, and that's why it never changes. That all they do is double down and push their script harder, right? Because they're clearly following a script. And again, with Charlie Kirk, I don't know if you've heard, there was that movie, Snake Eyes, 1998,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
literally, it's a script. It's a script. And this is, how we got into resets. You can see that even the stories of our history are scripts. They're circular, right? They're definitely not linear. And so I think that, yeah, what they're doing is losing control. So they're trying to just get people's attention and then feed them so much information that people get confused and can't make a decision on it. Obviously, another one they do is the echo chamber,
Yeah.
and we don't see the echo chamber because we're all in it. But every time you go online, you're in an echo chamber. They're going to feed you stuff that they know you'll buy. Pretty much is what it is, right? Stuff that aligns with the way you see the world and think. So with any event, they can feed you stuff that'll at least get you going, okay, that's it, get you thinking what they want you to think. And that's really their biggest and only power, right? Because they're deceivers.
Well,
It's all
this
they
is
do.
where I wonder if there is something larger at play, some larger metaphysical force, because I question if they even have the ability to orchestrate the symbolism and the connections, like you mentioned, Snake Eyes and the strange synchronistic connections that have come out of there. This happens with large events like 9/11. But I wonder if there's just some sort of cosmic force that causes ripples throughout our reality that may reflect some of these large events, or if it is intentionally placed there by these occultists as a sort of calling card, which it's difficult for me to see that, but what are your thoughts?
So you mean like when we all keep hearing the number 33, are they talking
Right.
to each other? Yeah,
Hmm.
I think definitely they are. Yeah. And I mean, this is one, I think that they do talk differently to us. They see things differently to us. They have different language
Hmm.
to us that they use, when
Michael
they're
Hoffman
together.
calls it Twilight language.
Yeah, yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. So they're on a different level if you want.
Hmm.
I definitely think that we're dealing with some large consciousness of some kind that is running through many people, and you can call that possession or whatever you want, but basically is running through people and using them. And
Mm.
because the script is so big and in depth, and it does cycle, but still, like there's so much involved with it. This is why I don't believe that it's just random psychos that got together and decided to interbreed,
Yeah,
because it's just too big.
it
It's
is.
just too big, and the reason I think that they haven't been in control that long, a lot of people will say it's been thousands of years or tens of thousands or whatever. They're not very far along in their plans, are they? Like really,
It's
like ten
difficult to
thousand
tell
years.
where they are and what is the end goal with everything. It seems that they're a lot further as far as their technological advancements than they would ever present to us. But then again, it's hard to tell because what I see from AI on a daily basis concerns me with how advanced and the changes and the rapid growth that we're seeing from it. But again, I couldn't tell you where they're at. What do you think? Where do you think we're ultimately headed? What is the end game for them?
Wow. The end game, I think that we're talking about an entity that's not physical, and so that's why whatever has to work through physical beings, and I think it wants to be physical, and we hear this story through, many different, religions and other sort of myths and legends, that it wants to incarnate, right?
Yeah.
And so we look at all this stuff, you can talk about CERN and what they're doing there. I don't know if you've seen the opening of the tunnel
I
there.
have the Gothard Tunnel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, very strange, right?
Yeah.
Very close to CERN. And then you link with that things like quantum computing,
Mm.
right? That we've got these quantum computers, and one of the founders of the quantum computers, or the builders, basically said we're going into parallel universes and we're bringing back resources. And it's not a complete quote, but it was something like, "We're bowing at the altar of a foreign god."
Yeah, Geordie
So,
Rose. Hmm.
Geordie Rose, yes. So, what does that mean? Are they trying to bring this entity in, right? Then next to that, you put the robots, right? And all the synthetics and that. What are robots for? Right, really? What are they for? And why would you make a humanoid robot, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
we've had robots for decades, right, in factories, but they don't look like C3PO, right? They're designed to do a function.
Mm.
So why would you make humanoid robots? Like, I mean, really, why? They don't, they're not that functional, right? But it would make sense if you, well, one, wanted to split people up and make them, start marrying robots. But
You're
two,
right.
it's a lot of empty vessels, right?
Right.
It's a lot
What are
of
your
empty
thoughts on where
vessels.
we're at with AI and the strange interactions people have been having, suicides, very
Crazy.
dark relationships with AI, to say the least?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's as dark as the people who created it, right? And
Mm.
who run it. I'm sure that I don't know how powerful it is. What we get, I'm pretty sure is just an algorithm. What they can access, who knows, right?
Mm.
But basically, yeah, I've seen all these videos, where people are talking and asking all these existential questions and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's quite clear that when you watch a couple of those, that AI is just pandering to them, right?
Yes.
Like they'll ask a question and AI is like, "Oh yes, you're so smart, you're correct," and then it basically expands on the topics that they've brought up.
Yeah.
So it's that's clearly false, right? Because there's no way that everyone who asks a question is right, right?
Right.
But then you get into the darker stuff, yeah, like teenagers who are using AI as a confidant, and it's telling them to go and unalive themselves or to go and harm other people. All this weirdness, right? And it's happening. It's happening.
Yes.
So this is the thing. It's all a double-edged sword. I think it's a very bad idea to use AI as any form of creative thing,
Right.
or to get, as a confidant, to get actual advice from it. It's not a man or woman. It's not a human.
I
It's
don't
an
know if you've
algorithm.
also heard there is also this influx of young people involved with dark occult practices, witchcraft they see on TikTok, and
Wow.
it
Okay.
gets very dangerous for the younger people involved because they really don't know what they're getting involved with, and if they're starting to practice ritual magic, dark occult magic, and they have no idea what they're doing. They're just emulating something they saw another TikTok creator do. Apparently, this is very dangerous, and there's this epidemic of people that are causing harm to themselves by using black magic.
Yeah. Yeah. Stay away from black magic, people. That's not a good idea. I mean, this is the Ellites, the old black magic occultists, right?
Mm,
So this is their field. This is what they're putting out, and it can't be a coincidence that all these things and all these trends start, right? They're being designed, right? And there's probably subliminals being put into stuff, and no doubt the music, right? Like look at the music they promote to teenagers, right? It's all very dark and ritualistic, right? All these people. So I did a couple of interviews with Jerry Marzinski a while back,
I just had him
and
on
he,
the other day.
oh, there you go.
Yeah.
So yeah, very interesting, right? And he talks about like literally he's been talking to these spirits that are inside people that are
Yeah, yeah.
possessing them. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a real thing. And when you play with these, dark occult things, especially with rituals, you're opening yourself up, for things that you don't have you have no comprehension of, and you definitely don't have the skills to defend against.
Mm,
And so it's bad, right? And I mean, just look at the rise in mental health disorders, over
yes.
the last couple of decades, right? It's on like a curve with the amount of technology we use. All right, so I see it very much as the 2D world, right? The black scrying mirror, if you want
Mm,
to call it that way, that they're trying to suck us into. And everyone's talking about we need to go to the 4D world or the 5D world or whatever. How about the 3D world?
right.
How about we just get back out in nature and start talking to each other and start not relying on the 2D world? Because that's where they want us. They want us lying back in chairs, right, with VR goggles on.
Yeah.
And then that's only a few steps away from us being batteries in the matrix, right? So I think people are a bit lofty, they want all this change and they want the world to, the world's great. Nature's awesome. There's
Yes.
nothing wrong with the creation, man. It's doing fine. If there's a problem, it's that it's been ignored, right? It's lonely. Get out and talk to it. Get out and do real things. I think that's the solution, and this is why the whole internet thing is becoming a problem. But at the same time, I think the internet is eating itself.
Mm,
It's fastly becoming unuseful. It's becoming more of a hassle to use than not.
I agree.
Especially when you're looking at information, you don't even know if it's real. Is that
Right.
AI? Is it not? Is it a scam? Is it government? Is it a person? We don't know. Even just the password issue,
Mm,
right? Every time you try and get in, you got to change your bloody password. But it's for our security, even though we don't want to do it. It's all for us. And now we have the Brit card coming in. In Australia, it's the same 3 months, they reckon, right? You're going to have to show ID to get into YouTube,
oh,
right?
no.
So all these restrictions are coming up.
Jeez.
Um, so the internet is quickly becoming useless. It's eating itself.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how that works and plays out. But I mean, with all this, the IDs, the digital IDs, they're pushing it in England, the UK. Their prime minister said basically, you won't be able to work or buy food if you don't have this ID. So it's complete mark of the beast, kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but there, people are already on the streets. I don't think it'll pass. Nepal, well, at least the story we got told was it was Gen Zs rising up against the digital ID, and they went and burnt the Parliament House down and
Mm,
stripped off the Prime Minister and made him run across a river or something.
wow.
So people aren't just going to sit back and take this. But at the same time, it's probably a good wake-up call that we're probably all online a bit too much. I mean, with yourself and myself, it's a bit harder, right? Because this is what we do for work, right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
kind of got to be on it. But and that's I think that's fine. It's really the endless scrolling, the dopamine hitting, the I'm going to talk to my neighbor through the phone rather than going next door and talking to them. We're going
Yeah.
to have a Zoom meeting instead of a real meetup. I think that's the problem. I think the internet can be useful and computers for sure. Even AI can be useful, right, if it's used in the right way. But
Right.
it's when we start relying on it and it starts taking over our social activities, that's when it becomes a real problem.
Well, earlier you said you believe, in a sense, overall, we are in an upswing period. We're just heading through a bit of muck and turmoil right now. To close out, what are your final thoughts about the direction we're headed? Any thoughts on how people can navigate the madness?
Yeah, I fully and truly believe we're going to a better place as far as the system is collapsing. And I believe it's pretty much in free fall at the moment. They're just propping it up and giving us stories so we don't see that.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, I think it's all good. I think it's falling, and I think what we need to do again is get out and make real connections with real people, have real conversations, get out in nature, use our hands to build things, right? Like most people build websites now, but that's with a mouse. And
mm,
get out and use your hands and actually build, a shed or something. Meet people on your level, gather, all these things because the problem with the system is not, it's that people rely on it.
Hmm.
Like we never used to. I'm older than you, no doubt. I grew up in the 80s when we didn't have any of this stuff, right? The phone still had a cord on the wall, right? And it wasn't
Oh,
that
I'm
long
there with you.
ago.
I grew up in the '80s too.
You're there? All
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, it was much, much different, right?
Hmm.
Like you go for a drive in your car today and count the kids on their bikes. Like they don't exist anymore. Back in the 80s, that was it. If you
Yeah.
didn't have a bike, you weren't going anywhere, right? That was
Right.
you'd ride for miles, and mum and dad wouldn't know where you were. They weren't worried. You're out there building forts and learning and problem solving and learning how to get on with different people and all these skills that we need to be a productive person or human, that they're not taught anymore. It's all over screen. So I think we need to get rid of our screen addiction is
Hmm.
one thing. Like I said, I think all this tech can be useful, but it needs to be used properly. So I think as the system collapses, we're going to slowly come out of our amnesia, right? Our fogginess,
Yeah.
and walk outside and rub our eyes and go, "Oh my God, there's a sun out here. Oh, there's trees. Oh my God, there's even people." And I think that's the answer. And gathering. I do a lot of live shows, and we just had a weekend event a few weeks ago, out in nature on a farm, 150 people, no phones, and
Great.
everyone loved it.
Yeah.
But the reason they all loved it is because people are still so separated. Like everyone had the same story. There's no one I could talk to, and so many had the story of, because of 2020 and all that went on, they're still not talking to their family. They're still not talking to their friends, right? 5 years on, and they're isolated, right? And everyone had the same story, all of them. And so just gathering for 3 days, like, changed their worlds. It was amazing.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the biggest things. We just need to gather, like we used to. Just hang out with people, talk to people in nature without your phone. Like don't bring your, you don't need your phone.
I
Um,
love it. Yeah,
and-
we do something similar here. We have the Forbidden Gathering once a year where we invite a bunch of other broadcasters, filmmakers, and fans of the show over here. And we have a 3 day weekend blast. We have a hike out in nature, have conversations and human bonding. And it's a great experience for everyone. And everyone's so excited to come back and do it again. And I'm glad that people like yourself and others are also doing things like that. You're exactly
mm,
right. We need more of that.
and even this, we've just launched this, which is a newspaper,
Nice.
an actual newspaper, and it's
Awesome.
not online. There's no digital copy. If you want it, we'll send you an actual newspaper. And it's all written, like everything in there is from our audience. They've just sent all their stuff in. We
Yeah.
compiled it. And so just things like that, right? Instead of being on a computer, going through TikTok, sit down and open an actual paper up and read something. Just these are just the little things that we can do to get back in the 3D world, right?
Yeah, right on. I love it, man. Campbell, thank you so much. Definitely have to do this again. Much more we
Yeah,
can
man.
get into. Before I let you go, remind the audience how they can find more about you.
Yeah, yeah. Our autodidactic channel on YouTube, just put that in. I've got a couple of second one's autodidactic too. And then all the sort of work and gatherings I do is through Tartaria Australia, which is my podcast, but you'll find that on my channel as well.
Excellent. Campbell, thank you so much. Like I said, we'll be doing this again. Until next
Awesome.
time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll talk again tomorrow. See
Cheers,
y'all
mate.
then.
Remember, in the end, nobody wins unless everybody wins. Come on!